Welcome to Meets in Midgard. I am your host, Mac McCurdy, and um, I am currently running a series that is called Meets in Midgard. And I am speaking now with a special guest, Sanford Kauffman. Sanford, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for being here. Um, I have a very cool, I think, very big topic today, which is um, going to be, I know it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers and it's going to be a kind of a thing, and I'm hoping it does. But it's called inclusion in heathenism. And I'm sure people are wondering why I chose a cis white male to be speaking on this topic, and I do have a reason, and we will get into that later. But right now, let's get a proper introduction to you. Um, Sanford Kauffman. I have a big list of accomplish, accomplishments that you have here. I'm going to go through them, so just correct me if I say anything wrong or I miss something. But you have a PhD in pre medieval Northern European culture and esoteric practice, master's in divinity, bachelor's in biblical theology. You minored in world religion, minored in philosophy. You're the Gothi of Swa Alvehof, prior Thane of Wolves of the North Kindred, former Director of Public Relations for the Asatru community, former Lead Ambassador of the North Central region for the Asatru community. Your current affiliations are the Asatru Feligid, your Swa Alvehof, and Nordic Wolf Clan, and the Great Heathen Alliance. That sound about right to you?
That's pretty darn close, yeah.
Am
But
I mispronouncing anything, by the way? You can tell me if I'm
well,
being.
I'm not big on pronunciations. Most people can't, pronounce everything exact anyway. Um,
Yeah.
I even mess up with pronunciations, so it happens frequently that I'll mispronounce stuff, even English words. So I don't hold much to it. Um, with all that, I don't hold a huge candle to making sure that you pronounce something that's not your mother language exactly.
the the one that I'm I was really struggling with was the Swa Alvejo.
That's Shao Alva.
Shao
So
Alva.
SJ
Shao.
can
Okay.
either make the sia or she sound. So it would be Shao Alva
Okay.
to make it easier for English speaking individuals.
Shao Alva. I'm gonna hold on a second. So really quickly though, I need to see if we are actually live again. Because okay, we are.
Good deal.
Because yeah, I don't want to go through this. Oh my gosh.
Ayla just said it's not working. Let
Edit
me check it
private
on mine here.
public. Okay, so I made it public now.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing it on my page.
on your page.
Yeah, I see it on my
Yeah,
phone, but not.
yeah, because right now it's just showing. It's not showing that you're live.
Grid view.
Is anyone on the Facebook? feed there that you can see on your end.
Okay, yeah. It's just I think.
Let me go in here and
Okay,
refresh it.
yeah.
Because if there's anyone on there, then we're fine.
Okay, yeah. I got 5 people viewing, and
All
there's a
right.
little someone popped in on the chat. So for people who
Okay.
don't know, earlier I was broadcasting only to myself and had to restart this.
Yeah.
So
I'm getting messages from my lady stating that she can't get it.
okay,
So, oh yeah, it shows here. I just saw it.
okay.
Where did it go? It was on my feed just now, but then it ran away. Facebook decided to bump it.
I'm having such a technical
Well,
difficulty
people
today.
want to see it. They'll just have to hope that they can see it later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's showing here that it's we've got some people watching. So
Yeah.
anyway, if I see people in the
We're live.
chat.
So back to it. I'll just shoot her a message real quick and say it's on there.
Yeah, she just needs to go to my page, I guess. Andy Meyer says hello, by the way. Cameron White did those little eye emojis. Yeah, so I mean we're there. People are seeing us. So
All right. So
so
back to the topic at hand.
back to the topic at hand. So it was Shao. How say that again?
Shall Alvahof.
Shao Alva. Alva.
Yes.
Shao. I'm gonna write this down because I needed to. That's just me. Wanting to get things right. So okay. And then Shao Alvehoff, you're the Gothi for that, correct?
Yes.
All right. What is that exactly?
It is a inclusive heathen group.
Hmm.
We actually have four faiths that are represented in the Hof. We have Norse paganism, or Asatru. We have Celtic paganism, Buddhism, and Hellenic paganism, or Greek paganism.
Oh
So
wow.
we have full spectrum. We do rituals that associate with each of these faiths, such as we did a Beltane, which is Celtic. We did Ilaf Bulia, which is Greek, and then coming up next week we have Erintakron, which is actually a Germanic ritual. It associates with winter nights, or Samhain in the Celtic.
Hmm.
And last month we did, I'm trying to remember the name of it because it's a Greek word. It associates with Dionysia, um, and that whole concept as well. Excuse me. So we accept anyone of any practice or faith who wishes to grow spiritually, because um, well, trying to be inclusive here. So therefore, we
Hmm.
accept people of that group. And being in a community that's rural, there's not a lot of specific, faith specific groups available unless you're a Lutheran or a Catholic or some other um, denomination of Christian.
Hmm.
So we accept those people, and then they get to share their faith. We can also grow and expand our knowledge of other faiths, and it helps us to understand, because one of the biggest things against that I believe combats bigotry and discrimination is education. A lot of times we fear and look down upon that which we do not understand. And so, therefore, gaining an understanding of the culture and beliefs of another individual is key to being inclusive.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to hit on that as well a little bit later on as far as educating ourselves and how as a Norse heathen, I think that is, you know, vital in our daily lives to in our quest for knowledge. So we will get to that it's part of our subject as well. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, personal life? Let's get to know Sanford as a person, and we can uh, move on so people can say like, "Oh, I can relate to this guy," and maybe this is why he's speaking on this topic. So tell us a little bit
Right.
about yourself, kids.
Well, yeah. All right. I was born in Southwest Wisconsin, where I currently live after gallivanting across the globe during my military days and in gaining my children after my divorce. I currently have a lady, Ayla Javi's daughter, who is the Gidia Afigaboran kindred in Indiana, which is a Celtic practice. I have a non binary child who is a senior in high school and has been accepted into ETSU to study um, early child development. And my second child, um, she is a sophomore in high school and plans to go into the military as a combat medic and then eventually become a nurse. That's their goal. So I'm basically a normal guy. I deliver sheds for my mundane occupation that
Mhm.
pays the bills. And so, yeah, I'm a normal dude that does that thing. I did grow up as a Mennonite kid, which is not exactly normal. It's fundamentalist Christian faith, pacifist, rose out of the Anabaptist movement. And so, therefore, when I growing up, I didn't have television, we didn't have radio. That was considered a sin. And a very exclusive group
Mhm.
because I feel like I'm repeating myself because we went through this already.
I know.
Um, so a
Privately.
very exclusive group. The difference between it was more of an us versus them, the
Mhm.
world or the English, which is the English in Pennsylvania German, and der Deutsche, which is the um, Pennsylvania German equivalent to the German. So it didn't matter if the person was Latino or whatever, they were just English. That's how we looked at anyone that wasn't part of our group. And I guess one benefit to growing up and speaking a Pennsylvania German, which is a mix of Old Low German, from which Old Norse came from, um, and well, it's actually a sister language to Old Norse,
Mhm.
Old Low German, and Yiddish, which is mixed together to create that Pennsylvania German, as well as English variants it's picked up from the 18th century on when Mennonites first migrated to America. Um, it definitely affected the way I look at the world, as well as many things that I had to re educate myself on in order to transition fully into being a Norse heathen.
Sure. And I know we had discussed this earlier when I thought we were broadcasting to everybody and it was just me, but I want to hit on it again how um, important it is because a lot of people that convert or move into a new faith, especially in the United States, had come from a Christian upbringing of some sort. And so there's always that whole okay, they replace Christian ideals, but they keep the Christian ideals, but in the a different aspect, saying like, okay, well, Odin must be the equivalent of God, Loki, the devil, even though that's it takes a lot of deprogramming to get out of that mindset for that. But and there's a lot of things that are taught um, that reinforce, you know, uh, ideals that cause this separation, and it takes a great undoing to, like I said, deprogramming to move away from that. And we will talk on that a little bit when we get into the subject of inclusion and heathenry. And I think it's a integral part of heathenry inclusion is, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say about that. It is kind of a
Yeah.
controversial subject on top of it. So,
Yeah. Well, when you reprogram your mind, you pick and choose. You take stuff that's beneficial to your growth and development, such as a good work ethic, um, devotion and loyalty to family, those type of things, they coincide with the heathen mindset and the heathen worldview. Whereas other such, practices that do not coincide with the heathen worldview, such as gender specific roles, those do not align with the heathen worldview, and those come from the Christendom perspective. And I use the term Christendom because Christianity that is practiced today isn't exactly the same as what it was pre Roman influence. Um, it
It
became a
definitely
state
has.
thing, and mhm,
I was just gonna jump in. It definitely has evolved into something very different, modern day
mhm,
Christianity.
yes. And even today, like there's very different views from one denomination to another. Some are more inclusive than others. Others are very exclusionist and
Hmm.
downright bigoted, in my opinion. Whereas others are very accepting of, say, LGBTQIA and other ethnic groups. And then you have terms like First Baptist and Second Baptist that coincides with apartheid. Um, Originally, First
Hmm.
Baptists were all white congregations, and Second Baptists were, well, not
Not.
white. So um, I mean, it relates to that. So you see that. I mean, there are now First Baptists that are POC. So it's changed,
Hmm.
but it originated in that concept.
Hmm.
So, you take into it. But
Yeah. Well, thank you
every
for
group has their quirks.
yeah. So, and we're gonna dive into some of those quirks that you had to alter your perspective on as well. So how long have you been Norse pagan, and do you identify as Norse pagan, or do you use some other term, just pagan or heathen?
I generally use the term Norse pagan, although, I mean, Norse heathen, sorry, as it's linguistically closer to the Northern European tradition, as pagan comes from Southern Europe, Italy. Yeah, it's originally a Latin term, um, though the definition of the two words, pagan and heathen, is basically the same. And I don't get salty if someone calls me ascetic. So, however, my beliefs as a whole are more pantheistic. I accept that other deities that are outside the practice that I use are legitimate, even though they're not ones that I personally relate to. Everyone has their own connection with the esoteric. Um, and my belief that deities are all interconnected because you have energy that exists throughout the cosmos. So therefore, it can be called chi or Nuna or Megan, which is the Old Norse term. And it's the same, whether it represents a deity, a human, an animal, or even what we consider to be inanimate objects, such as trees and stones. Those are all interconnected. And through the Norse faith, it's through Yggdrasil, or literally meaning terrible horse or Odin's horse, however you want to look at it. It's
Mhm.
the transit point that exists through those. And it interconnects all of us. And therefore, whether I choose to call myself a Norse heathen, who I am, um, it's, it's still the same spiritual growth and my connection to the esoteric and to the divine as someone who practiced, Hellenic or Celtic paganism or
Mhm.
Buddhism or Shintoism. It's a cultural difference that one uses to relate to the same energy pool. I began my transition, getting back to the original question, I jumped ahead of myself.
That's right.
I began my transition in 2010, did not go public until about 2013 or 14. And so I will leave that to the audience as to whether, I've been doing this for more than a decade or right around a decade.
Mhm.
Um, as opinions vary as to when you became,
Mhm.
based on whether you started the search or you went public.
Um, I know just when I talk to you and I'm speaking with you and we're on subject about some things, to me, you just have this like a wealth of knowledge, like a presence. Like you've been doing this, you've been on this your whole life. That's just the vibe I get from you, which kind of leads me to the next question: is what drew you to this path? Was there a seed that was planted, something that influenced you, that changed your course in life that to become Norse heathen?
Yeah. Well, as I was stating before, um, the main reason I chose this path is cognitive and spiritual connection, which I can get to in a little bit more an explanation to that. During seminary, I became disenchanted with Christianity. You could say I learned too much to stay. And so, therefore, I began a search for connection. And I kept coming back to my first ever connection to heathenism, which is um, a book series in the Mennonite church I went to. We had a library, and I can't remember the title of the series, but in this, the main character was a Germanic chieftain named Atreides, and he was captured by the Romans, taken to Rome, you know, became a gladiator, and he worshipped Chivas. And I thought that was so cool because it went a little bit into his connection. I'm a lefty, okay? Chivas was a lefty, and
Mm-hmm.
the Germanics believed that Chivas was directly connected and blessed a left handed warrior. So, that, of course, was something that my teenage brain connected to and fell in love with. And then during my study and my transition, I found out that this is associated with the Norse god. Tuvas is the Norse god Tyr. It's
Mm-hmm.
the difference between Proto-Germanic and the Norse, the Old Norse. And so it further made me excited because of the um, his attributes. You know, he's a god of justice. He's a god of war. And then working with him later, um, it very much connected with who I was as a human being at that time. And so, therefore, that would be why I chose Norse paganism because of that connection. And that's why I would call Tyr my patron deity because he's essentially the one who gave me the call.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That's really cool. So even as a kid, that was planted in you, and I always say that this path is a very natural path because it's it basically it's in our blood. It's our brought down from our ancestors. It's already in you, and just allowing that to come out is a process in itself, but it's pretty amazing when it happens.
Well, if you want to talk about collective memory, we can go way into that. That's a totally different topic right there. Um,
Which is not a bad idea. But and I wanted to mention this. This will not be the last time we see you on this show because you have so much in that head of yours. I think it needs to be shared with as many people as possible. So yeah, we'll be getting into a lot of different topics throughout the year with you. So keep that in mind.
indeed,
You will be back.
indeed. So I
So
just
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. I just took my one earbud out. It died, so I
Oh.
charged it. So
Okay. How about we dive into today's topic now? It took us a while to get here because I, for people that are watching now, I kind of fumbled at the beginning. It was broadcasting only to myself on my page. We had to start over. So here we are, finally to the topic of today, inclusion in heathenism. So let's talk about the definition of inclusion, both just as a regular term and then as a term within the heathen community. Is there a difference? Does it matter? And How do you define inclusion?
Well, if we want to go into the dictionary definition, I encourage someone to look it up because I couldn't quote to you the dictionary definition of the term inclusion.
Hmm.
What I call inclusive heathenism or inclusion
Hmm.
is when an individual is accepted or rejected based on personal merit rather than an identifier. Their merit, their worth is defined by actions rather than ethnicity or sexuality. Um, and the reason I use those is because they're the most common um, infringement of one's autonomy that exists within heathen culture, specifically folkish groups such as
And
the AFA.
yeah, what is folkish? I know a lot of people when I first was becoming heathen. I don't even think that term was being thrown around at the time, but and so when it was rearing its head, I had no idea what it was. I know now, but could you just
Yeah.
explain folkish um, to the
Well,
layman?
folkish loosely would be a Reconstructionist heathen. Um, an organization that considers themselves folkish attempts to remain as close as possible to the original practice that was utilized. They will
Mm.
use primarily the original language. I guess you'd consider them the Catholics of heathens
Okay.
because they're fundamentalists. They hold to the original, you know, writ rights rather than as much as they possibly can. Um, and they may take it to the extreme. Some do take it to the extreme that you must be descended from the region in which the faith originated.
Hmm.
Okay. And they will hold to reproduction as the key core as to, gender specific stuff. So you need to be heterosexual in order to be a part of the community. Um, and this stems from the lack of the use of hermeneutics primarily, the latter especially. Because they don't understand, they have a lay opinion without really understanding what the culture is. It's been fed by this guy or that guy, or you have a bigoted person with a PhD in the culture of that era. And so, therefore, he puts his twist, and then the other people just read what he said
Hmm.
and they say this is how it actually was. When in reality, without studying for themselves and learning the culture behind the doctrine, they don't get a full view. A lay opinion is what causes that, and that comes in most bigotry comes from ignorance. You know, the
Absolutely.
simple and the long and short in that. But yeah, so you can be folkish if you like the old school, you like rituals in Old Norse. You can be a Norse heathen and be folkish in that regard without being a bigot.
Hmm.
However, folkish tends to lead to bigotry in a lot of ways because you'll get into the teachings that it's for the Germanic people groups, um,
Hmm.
and so if you're not of that line, then they don't want you to be a part of their group.
And there's still like I uh, knowing that there's this fallacy to the concept of people thinking you have to be of the place of origin because culturally speaking in that time they mixed cultures, bringing in slaves or
Mm-hmm.
um, even spreading out into other and inhabiting other areas was also a blending of cultures. But it's almost as if the folkish refused to acknowledge that.
Well, I think it has to do with, those who began the teaching in modern heathenism, at least. Those who
Hmm.
began the teaching were bigots. They were neo-Volkish, which is a Nazi term.
Hmm.
So, they were, you know, the master race idea. And so
Hmm.
they let that come into their doctrine. One of the primary teachers coming into this here period in time um, would have been the teachings of Guido von List and Edward Thorson, and also David Lane, I believe is his last name. All three bigots. Guido von List helped pen the Nazi rhetoric, so that would tell you a lot about him right there. And the other two were very adamant students of his, although they were a bit younger than he was. So it comes into play with that whole thing with the Volkish movements that exist today. You generally run across their teachings.
Absolutely. So, as heathens, we find a community to be in, and I think for marginalized groups, um, some of them find it hard or difficult to relate in a way to the lore or the sagas to find something that brings them into it. And I think it's just from a lack of understanding the lores and the saga. So, was inclusion a concept in the sagas? Was it? And can you give us an example of that?
Well, it was inclusion existed from the very beginning. Um, in the Gylfaginning, and it extends all the way through the end. So in the Endless Saga, I will go into teachings. If you don't have the book, I'm going through the core values by Ryan Smith. He talks about autonomy.
Really,
And
really quickly, the book you're referencing is The Way of Fire and Ice by
yes,
Ryan Smith, and that is such a great book. I recommend it to people for the past few years. He'll be a guest on the show as well later on in 2025, but that is a book worth reading. It is good, and I know that you have your series that you're running where you're actually going through the book, and it is just so profound to go through that. But sorry, that was a little sidetrack there. But anyway, go ahead, carry on.
well, I'm going through the core values to be specific that he has. I'm not going through his entire book. I
Right.
encourage
Yeah.
people to read the book. Go through the core values as a core tenet because people like things that are laid out. And there's a big thing about 9 noble virtues and the Syrian Code of 9. Well, Ryan Smith created his own, and it's called the core values. And within the fundamental values, the very first one, which I agree with because it's the most important, is autonomy. Okay, and he talks about in the Havamol, Voluspa, okay, where Odin, Loder, and Önir. Some people say they're Odin, Vili, and Ve, and others say they're not. So, and I believe in the Gylfaginning it does use Vili and Ve. So interchangeable to an extent. They gave the gifts to humanity, and the one gift they did not give is autonomy, because not even the gods have a say in the autonomy. Not even they can infringe upon the autonomy of a human being because it's inherently there. And that autonomy includes, it's the right to be a self-governing individual. Then you go into Asgard. Its connection. So its populace was Aesir, Vanir, Alfar, Jotnar, Svartalfar, and Dvergar. Okay, so you have multiple ethnic groups, and those actually are beyond ethnic. They're species, denizens of different universes, or different realms within the universe. Odin, the father of the gods, his mother was a Jotun. Okay, some scholars say that she was related to Mimir, from the Mimis Bruna, the well of Mimir, where Odin placed his eye later on. And then you have the Upregen that are spoken of in Voluspa. And those are mainly Jotnar, okay? Some are Vanir that were included later, and others were Aesir. even later. Aesir was more of a nationality than an ethnicity, so to speak, as because it kind of gleaned from everybody. It was the New York City of the Norse cosmos, the melting pot, okay,
Yeah.
of all these different species and ethnic groups, so to speak, that came together. And within that, if they included, why can't we? Are we
Hmm.
better than the gods themselves, who would include
Hmm.
anyone of any ethnic group, any origin, you know?
Hmm.
So that's why I would say it holds to that we must accept. And, Tyr, my patron, he was an immigrant. He was a captured Jotun. His
Hmm.
father was Hymir, a Jotun. His mother was, people aren't sure whether she was a Jotun or whether she was a human woman,
Right.
based on different interpretations of what it says in the lore when they're going after the big cauldron to make mead in. So, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's it's pretty amazing. If you
That
look at it, it's all over the place.
that is that I'm so glad you said all of these things because it's right in front of people's eyes, and I don't think they really realize that. They think of maybe they think of some distant, far off place that is almost like fairy tale kind of a thing. When these are um, living, forces that are combined and brought down, just like our own ancestors. There's a whole stream of this that just comes through us, a mixture of places. So yeah, that even though it's right in front of people, people don't realize like Othin himself, is of mixed race. Like you said, there's an immigrant Tyr. There's um, uh,
Well, Loki, he's an immigrant as well,
yeah,
and he's mixed because his Jotun, all both Jotun, but you have one as a wind Jotun and the other as a frost Jotun. So you have
mm,
two different, groups within the Jotun spectrum.
mm-hmm,
So,
yeah. I mean, it's like right there in front of everyone's face, and then to think that these ideologies within North heathenism and folkism, I should say, the folkish exist when the evidence is blatantly right in front of their faces.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, we know about the gods and their inclusion now. Let's talk about the practical practice of inclusion in heathenry. Historically, was inclusion practiced in heathenry in the past, and how was it practiced?
Well, I would honestly, you have the stories,
Right.
but the most concrete evidence, archaeology. All right.
Hmm.
You have a brooch found within the grave of a woman thought to be a vulva
Hmm.
or a witch, which is a witch or a priestess within a Scandinavian society. And on it was the Arabic Allahu Akbar.
Mm.
Okay. So she accepted not only is it from another culture, but another faith.
Mm.
She was a practitioner of the Nordic faith. She was a priestess. And she accepted the Islamic talisman, you know, that existed there. So, it doesn't just accept their culture, it also accepts their esoteric connection, you know.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
Historically, the level of inclusion, okay, like varied. And this is going from sources. And if you want to talk about people gleaning cultures, you can go into the Latin culture, you can go into the pitted ware culture, which are pre Norse, pre Celtic cultures that existed. And one of the primary exports from northern Europe was amber, which can be found from that era clear down in Iraq and Iran.
mm.
So it's a very widespread connection. And then, of course, you find an Arabic brooch, which would
Yeah.
obviously be a little bit after the Latin culture because it's Arabic is actually younger than, I mean, Islam is younger than Christianity. So we're talking, mid 7th to 8th centuries probably, um, where that would have been, developed even. They would have had something else. The art styles probably would have had connections, but not the term Allahu Akbar. And then historically with inclusion, um, it varied. They didn't have a common, rule for across Northern Europe and Scandinavia. They so it based temporally and spatially. You know, homosexuality for sexuality, for example, it was accepted in varying degrees from complete acceptance to ostracism and execution.
Hmm.
Um, so it varied, from one place to the other. With that, the main factor was they were a war culture, and so therefore they didn't have good medicine, so they had a low life expectancy in a child, and so they wanted procreation. Basically, their concept with many was have fun how you want to, but make sure you pay your debt to society and create babies. Um, you know, and so they considered a failure to do so, um, you know, not
Almost
performing your duty
criminal.
to society. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you wanted to, get frisky with and you preferred the same gender, go for it. Enjoy
Hmm.
yourselves. Do what you want. Just make a baby.
Yeah.
Um, in
Fulfill your
fact,
duty.
once Vikings, when pagan Vikings discovered that homosexuality was taboo in Christian society, they made it a point to rape males when conquering Christian areas.
Wow.
So they're kind of like, you guys are dumb, you know? And so, and I think it's great because, you know, they were just like, yeah, we're going to do that, So,
Uh-huh.
um, and then with immigrants and immigration. So, as you stated earlier, most oftentimes the people that would come into Scandinavian society were slaves that were captured during raids. However, they could gain their freedom. Okay. And then they would be accepted into the community regardless of ethnic origin once they had met meritorious requirements.
Hmm.
They had proven that they were an asset to the society, and so therefore they were accepted. And
Hmm.
it didn't really matter. And so you have descriptive names in Norse because they were big on giving people like fork beard or red
Hmm.
mustache, you know. So they would give people those names and they would describe attributes that were not typically Scandinavian, you know, as a way to describe another individual, whether these people were from Finno-Ugric, the Sapmi peoples up to the north, or whether they were Moors.
Hmm.
There were people described as dark skinned, and so therefore we're not sure if they were Moors, if they were, Mongolian descent as the Huns came in to the area. We're not sure, but
Hmm.
either way, they weren't traditional Scandinavian looking individuals. And
Hmm.
Tyr and Njord, both both those things, they both gained status in Asgard. You know, so Njord was bragged about in Vafthrudnismal
Hmm.
by Odin. It says he has many temples and shrines, even though he's not native born. And Tyr being named to the position of Thane,
Hmm.
which means he's like the representative of Odin when Odin's not around. He's one of his primary generals. He speaks for Odin,
Hmm.
you know, within the thing and with other rulers if Odin is not present. And so that there would they both gained very prestigious positions within, the Assyrian community.
Hmm. Wow, that is such. It's a mind blowing to to know that this has been culturally, a thread, many threads in this culture the whole time, and people are still closed to seeing the obvious in front of them. I think it's a lack of, and we're going back to knowledge and education, and people are just picking what they want to really justify their narrative rather than considering everything as a whole to allow them to gain that knowledge. Um, it's counterproductive to what Odin himself teaches to go out
Mm-hmm.
and seek knowledge. So and there it is, right in front of our faces. It's in day to day. lore, practices back then, and even to now, up to today, which brings me to my next question is, has inclusion evolved in over time in heathenry, and how has it?
Well, how would be basically connected to hermeneutic adjustments,
Hmm.
today's society, different issues become part of the um, social spectrum, social concerns, and so therefore that shifts. People looked at life differently, and so therefore, you know, those aspects need to be addressed. The Norse didn't, the Viking Age Norse didn't have to address things that we address today because they didn't exist in that time. And likewise, we don't have to address certain issues like when does a slave become a free person? We don't have slaves. So we don't,
Hmm.
obviously, we don't need to concern ourselves with that level of inclusion. I mean, it can go into immigration if you want to hermeneutically translate that. Should immigrants have an easier access into citizenship? According to the Norse, the period on average was about 4 years.
Hmm.
You came, you proved yourself, boom, you're a citizen. Um, And in Havamal, Odin states, straight up, he says to give them a ring. Okay. The traveler is to be given a ring. Okay. And that ring was an arm ring, the
Hmm.
symbol of full citizenship, and it basically, within the context of the area around it, was talking about whether they're good or bad, not where they're from, whether they're good or they're bad.
Hmm.
Give them, grant them full acceptance and acknowledgement, so that's going into politics, which I don't like to include in heathen stuff.
Hmm.
But it goes to within the community,
Hmm.
you know, and within that, we accept people no matter where they're from. If you want some, if someone is an immigrant, even, from another country, whether it be Latin America, whether it be Asia, whether it be, wherever on the globe, if they wish to come and become a part of your community and they have good merit,
Hmm.
accept them. You know,
Absolutely.
who they are, it doesn't matter.
Hmm. And uh, you know, given the history, and I think you hit a little bit on the political status, and we're not going to get into politics here, but it is such a hot topic. Immigration is a real big subject right now, and I think a lot of people in the heathen community kind of don't have good information on this, and if they studied and they learned, like Tyr, for example, himself an immigrant, Loki himself an immigrant, that it it was just part of that facet. It wasn't a heated, debatable thing. It was a day to day portion of life for them, and so that leads me to ask: is inclusion necessary in heathenry?
Indeed, it's necessary. It's imperative. It accepts
Mm-hmm.
and respects the core concept of heathenism. It protects the autonomy of each individual, and it recognizes the interconnection of every being within the new Hamar in the energy flow that I spoke of earlier. Okay. And it flows from the Urdabruna through Yggdrasil and throughout the Cosmere. All beings, okay, regardless of origin or any other identifier, on a spiritual and cognitive level, we are energy fragments of one energy pool. Through animistic philosophy, and by extension, the Nordic philosophy, we are all one. We
Mm-hmm.
are, like technically the Cosmere being, say a human. Each one of us is a cell, but we belong to the greater whole. We're individual yet interconnected. And
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, and based on animistic and Nordic philosophy, this doesn't allow for us to exclude people based on what part they play in the universal role or what part of the universal body they came from.
It's a matter of merit, not
Exactly.
skin tone. Where
If
you're,
a cell's bad, you get rid of it. The body gets rid of it. If something's sick, we get rid of it. You know.
there's before I go on to the next question, there's some comments in the chat that I just want to show really quick that I think are really great. Topher says that so much of the Havamal is about being accommodating and friendly towards the traveler, and that is so key. I have a warm towel, or not a warm towel, but I have literally just as a measure of speaking. I have a towel at my front door to symbolically recognize that I am welcoming the travelers. To give them a warm cloth, to clean them. So symbolically, I have that ready to go, and that's such a point. Being friendly towards the traveler, how to behave as a traveler as well. Um, and your lady, or not your lady, I'm sorry, Siga. Here, your lady was in here earlier, but Siga says it stands to reason that if you understand the gods in your faith accept immigrants and are themselves immigrants, you transfer that to how you act, move, and live in Midgard, and that is so um, spot on. I think that's a well-made point right there. So.
Yes, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of summarizes what I'm trying to say in so many words.
Mm-hmm. This next question. So I'm not going to drop names, but there was a person that I follow on YouTube. I really, really like them, but they made a comment um, one one time about how culturally speaking, people he wasn't come out flat saying if you're not this, don't practice this faith. Don't be a Norse heathen. But basically, he was saying you'll get more out of something if you stick to your own cultural beliefs. Like a Native American would practice, that their form of heathenry as compared to a Native American practicing Norse heathenry. Um, and I was like, there are things you can bring from your own place that you come from into Norse heathenry, any heathen faith, really. And I found that the way he presented that offensive. Um, so and it led me to this question: does inclusion hurt or dilute the core origins of Norse paganism?
It does the opposite. It confirms the core values of Norse paganism. And it also honors the very will of the gods. And I'd like to, based on that quote from Havamal and the Lodfofnismal, what Odin said in regards to guests or adding other people. It can be an immigrant, it can be that. It says, I recommend Lodfofnir that you heed my advice. You will profit if you learn it and benefit from understanding. Never mistreat a guest or close your door to the homeless. Show kindness to the destitute. The door frame must be strong for a revolving door allowing all entrance. Give a gift to the needy, but secure your door against your demise. The term guest here can be a traveler, it can be an immigrant, it could be somebody from without the ethnic spectrum of the faith. It's someone that's not native to it, so to speak. All right? And it basically would say to bring them in, to give them full things. It says to give a gift, to the needy. And this could literally be grant admission or citizenship to the one who asks. All right? You see what I'm saying? So it comes into, modern immigration, it comes into acceptance into your kindred, to your fellowship, into your group. you know. But then it says secure your door against your demise. It's a caution. If this person is not going to be an attribute or an asset, guard against that. Don't overextend yourself in allowing just everyone. And also know your limits. You know, you can only handle so many people. You can only reach out to so many people. And so therefore, if you have more than you can handle, it'll be detrimental to you in that statement. And also the whole concept of give. You know, if someone is in need, you give to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you do what you can to help another person out. However, don't give somebody money because they're short on their bills so that you can't pay your own bills. You know, that's kind of dumb. So inclusivity goes, in my opinion, inclusion goes beyond, you know, who you accept into your communities, but it also goes to how you affect, how you relate to the other people that are without your community, that aren't part of your kindred. You know, if they come and visit, they're a guest, you know, and so you treat them with right, you know, and you be understanding to a person that doesn't understand how you do everything because, you know, they may do something that is culturally unacceptable because they don't know the way of your culture. And we were talking about, you know, traveling around, gaining more knowledge in that. Odin said that a person who isn't widely traveled cannot be called truly wise. So if you don't take time to learn what other people think and how they do and how they act, according to Odin, you don't have the full concept of wisdom or the full spectrum. That's the word I'm looking for. Full spectrum of wisdom.
Right.
So, you know, it's the method by which they do things. It's their actions that matter, not where they're from or who they are.
That's well said. Well said. We do have a comment in here. You had talked about the like neo-folkish being the Catholics as a group. I think maybe some people want some clarity on this. Um, your lady had something to say about it. She says, I think it's very important to mention that Catholics are not exclusive, particularly as it concerns race. She's a bit
Okay.
off mentioning that focus heathens.
All right.
So,
Okay. So,
if you just
well,
want to
I'm not
hit
talking
on that.
about within folkish. I'm not talking about the exclusive folkish. Okay. I'm talking about fundamental. Okay. So folkish are reconstructionists. Okay. They stick as close to what they know as the original practice of the Norse faith. All right. Technically, a lot of us will do it. I do it myself. We use the Old Norse Hammerite. That's technically folkish because it's reconstructing or recreating that atmosphere that would have existed there with their language, so on and so forth. And the Catholics, they have the oldest commonly practiced faith, unless you want to argue about Greek Orthodox. Okay. They would have their masses are in Latin in a lot of places. And it probably varies because there's different groups of Catholics as well. I'm not talking about the exclusion factor. Within heathenism, that exclusion goes into play. Okay. In some groups, there are people who consider themselves folkish that are not bigots. You know, it's possible to be folkish and not be a bigot. It's simply the fact that most of your bigoted groups are folkish groups.
Well, thank you for
So
clarifying.
that's I was referring to practice, not exclusivism. I was referring to the practice.
Right.
Connection.
Right. So someone had mentioned I saw a YouTube video on this where they were talking about inclusivity and how it's being like forced down people's throats nowadays. It's all in your face, the whole bit. And they used the example of the exchange of hostages between the Aesir and the Vanir, being like that was forced inclusion. Um, so I didn't feel right with that, but so I wanted to ask you, was the exchange of the hostages during the war between the Aesir and the Vanir an example of inclusion, forced inclusion? Your thoughts on that?
Well, the main difference with that, so in most of your peace hostages. The people were treated poorly or were treated well simply because they needed the favor of the other person they were fighting. So they would exchange important figures within one community with another, such as the chieftain's son. Germanic and Celtic chieftains were sent into Rome, for example, and raised as Romans. And then, so that comes into play. And some of them were, treated quite well. Some were Roman citizens when they came back into Germania. But, and then you take the concept of Nordfrey and Freya, okay? They were sent as slaves, so to speak, or as peace hostages, but they were granted full citizenship and noble status, okay, due to the fact that they proved themselves, as is aforementioned in Vafthrudnismal, okay? It says he gained. You know what I mean? He wasn't, he gained. So he got it for himself. He worked hard. He gained merit. He was, appreciated within society because of that factor. So was it originally being inclusive? No. It was to keep from fighting each other. Okay? You take some of our guys, we take some of your guys. Now, if you attack us, we're killing them. And they were important because Njord was the ruler of Vanaheim, and Frey and Freya were his children. And so therefore, we're going to kill your ruler if you attack us again. So basically it kept the Vanir from, doing damage, any more damage. But it became a factor of inclusion because of their practices within Asgard.
But it wasn't the forced in your face concept that people, I think, or some groups are trying to push around today. To them, that was a practice during times of war to have the peace settled, make peace.
It ensured peace.
And
then,
why? Oh, go ahead.
And then the way they acted was, an example of their, inclusion rather than they were being forced to be inclusive to these three individuals that came.
And so we do have the focus groups, that exist out there. Why do you think that certain Norse pagan groups oppose inclusion?
Well, it's because they're ignorant. Okay, I mean, just all right. As I stated before, most of their publications, their writings, neo-fascist groups, they use the writings of Guido von Lys as the basis for their philosophy. And I mentioned the founder of the AFA and other such groups. They would have read his works and that of David Lane, so on and so forth. And rather than studying for themselves and actually, looking into the lore, studying language, studying the culture, they just read the word vomit of these original bigots. And they say, oh, this is our faith and this is how it's supposed to be. And they just take it at face value. And they don't even realize what it's doing to them psychologically. And then also you have disenchanted white boys, okay, especially in areas that have a lower education level. They feel disenchanted because, minority groups are getting, compensation. They're getting these things that come along that because of wrong actions in the past. And people are saying these people need to be helped. These people need to be lifted up. They need to hold the same status. Well, they're not mentioned because they already have that status. And they feel, well, since we're not being mentioned, we're being looked down on, And so therefore they would turn in, they're like, our positions being infringed upon and who we are. And so then they join in because that rhetoric backs how they feel inside due to their misunderstanding of the current social climate.
Right. You hit on a lot of good points there. And I really truly believe it is a lack of education as well. And when you're seeing a marginalized group getting assistance or aid, and your first thought is, well, where's mine? you
Hmm.
know, instead
Especially
of,
your trailer park trash boys who don't have much money, you know?
yeah, or they're saying, oh, well, where's my white privilege? And they don't understand what the privileges they have that already exist. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're without privilege. And there's a complete lack of understanding of that. And I think in the heathen community, there's the people that just want to play Viking, and they
Yeah.
go into that whole mode, and it's for some reason it's there's an appeal to it for them, um, and don't they don't practice it. They don't read, they don't learn. They're stuck at one level, and that is it. And that's the extent of it for them. And I
Yeah.
always think, what an empty spiritual existence. you know
Yeah. But it has to do with full development. And going back into the white privilege thing where they don't see their white privilege. Okay.
hmm
You know, people in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where I live, where it's over 90% people are white, you
mm,
don't see it as much because everybody has it. You know,
right.
you don't run across, you don't see it the same as you would in Chicago or San Francisco
Right.
because everybody's white. So everybody has that privilege. And so therefore it takes away the ethnic spectrum of privilege. All you get is you have the rich guys and the poor guys. And so
hmm
that's the basis of privilege, you know, rather than the ethnic privilege because they don't know it exists. They don't realize it exists because they don't see the evidence of it because there's not any POCs in their communities hardly.
Which brings a great point. Odin himself said one of the best ways to gain knowledge is to travel. And you travel and
Mm-hmm.
you meet different cultures, different people, different mindsets, different faiths, all kinds of stuff. And I think then, you understand more. It becomes more of a reality of like, oh, no one's following me around in a store, uh, seeing if I'm going to steal something, based on the color of my skin, or, ladies aren't crossing the street because they're afraid of me because of the color of my skin, those types of things. Because they don't, like you said, if you're in a predominantly white area, or this could go for any culture really, and you're not
Mm-hmm.
exposed to other ideas and other cultures, you're not going to understand um, anything outside of that. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's such a great point. Um, so how has inclusion in Norse paganism affected you personally? And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to um, talk to you today about it as a subject.
Well, personally, it has affected my worldview, the inclusion. You know,
Mhm.
um, it has taught me that that identifiers aren't the concern when it comes to whether a person's accepted or not, but their value. And every
Mhm.
individual has that same value. You know, and with that, the mind change. The us versus them I grew up with to now it's the global community and the individuals that want to learn, that want to grow, that want to become more, versus
Mhm.
those who just exist or would infringe upon any other person because of who they are and something that is totally out of their control as to their identity.
Mhm. So, what role does race and ethnicity play in Norse paganism?
You kind of brought it up. It allows for flavor, it allows for an expansion of the worldview. You know, we talked about the traveling, Amber being in Iraq, because the pre Christian Nordic people, they traveled across Europe, they traveled to Asia Minor, North Africa. Okay. You know, they would have, from Iraq, brought back agriculture
Mhm.
to the to Northern Europe. Um, you know, and then even the Germanic, if you look at it, okay, actually had Armenian descent, okay, which is actually from Iran.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you know what I mean? You can't really say that you're all one group when you're kind of a melange of different cultural groups that ended up in one area and created the Germanic Nordic culture, you know?
Hmm.
So race allows for the development. Okay. So you bring a community, all right? And I've seen it with Shalalva. Okay. Now we don't have much for other race because we live in Wisconsin. Okay. So
Right.
there's not much for other race around here. However, we have 4 different religious identifiers within our religious community.
Hmm.
And it adds flavor. It brings different aspects, different purification rites, different deities with different aspects. And it makes the whole spectrum of our ritual experience broader, you know? And I love it. And when you do that and you bring someone of a different ethnic group, it just adds flavor because their outlook on life, especially if they're not from America,
Hmm.
it's amazing. Just the way they see a circumstance, it changes it and it allows you to see through a different lens. And through that different lens, you can grow and become more.
And that is so important, um, because you learn from that, even just the cultural kennings, different small little things can make such a huge difference getting the mindset or opinion of somebody else. Um, and, race is the big thing, but so is homosexuality. Let's talk about the LGBTQIA plus community in Norse paganism. What is up with that? What role does it play? Was it essential?
Well, the key role I would say it um, plays is that in exemplifying autonomy. You know, each individual's inherent right to be. Um, that one is welcomed, respected, and accepted as who they are. You know, and not only that, but to be considered as that they are exactly as they should be.
Mm.
All right. The transgender and non-binary individuals are explicitly explained within the Neoshelf.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
According to that philosophy, technically everyone is considered to be gender fluid or non-binary because within each of us lies both the masculine and the feminine polarities,
Mm-hmm.
and each aspect of the self is considered to have either masculine or feminine dominant polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very unlikely. I mean, if you just look at basic math, it's very unlikely that across 9 different parts that you're going to have all of them have the same dominant polarity,
Right, right.
you know? And so that would mean that each aspect of yourself has, you know, either or even both in unison, you know? Um, the key concept of transgender individuals would be the alignment of the hammer or the cognitive body and the leak or the physical body,
Right.
one having one dominance and the other having the other, and that would make you transgender, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, because, who you are, where physical people can't see, is not the same as what your physical body portrays to the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a big the self, the idea of self in North heathenism is such a big thing. I'd love to pick your brain on that on another episode of this. It's such a breakdown. And I think it would really help people to understand that because there are just different aspects that just play such different parts, and you combine it as a whole, and you say, this is me. This is my nature. This is who I am. You know. So I'll definitely have to pick your brain on that on another episode of this. So, yeah, but I do want to talk about your lecture at NERF, which is the Northern European Religions Festival this past year, and the explanation of transgender individuals in Norse paganism. I know it's a highly controversial subject nowadays, but was it controversial in the pagan origins? And then how was your message received at NERF?
Well, as I stated before, the acceptor transgender individuals was controversial even then.
Mm,
As I stated, there was not a set, idea. The Neoshalfer was not universal, and therefore, across Northern Europe, people looked at it different. Some would ostracize those individuals, and others would accept them. Um, Others believe that closer connection with themselves, that acknowledge the gender specification of their hammer, as well as that of their leek, the two
mhm,
parts of the self, um, meant that they had esoteric abilities, and so they would generally become a vulva or a vitki, or they would become an esoteric practitioner. We'll just say it that way.
mm,
And within that community, the esoteric community, gender roles weren't as stark. Um, and so, you know, it was easier to accept that difference without being able to have gender affirmation surgery because that wasn't available back then. So they had to learn to accept. And being in a less gender specific, you know, environment, it would be a lot easier on them, I'm sure.
mhm. Well said.
And
How did people take your message at NERF? Did you get
um,
some feedback on it?
um, well, I've had a few people. One guy kind of turned and walked away as it started, so
Mhm,
I'm guessing he didn't like it very much.
mhm,
And then others took notes and were accepting. Um, some, the gathering, I asked Ayla for her feedback, and she said she felt that some probably had no clue what I was talking about. Um,
mhm.
so it was just a variant across the spectrum. I know a few people came up and said they appreciated me doing it. Um, I didn't really get any negative feedback other than the guy walking away.
Mhm.
Um, I got one. They want me to use slides. Okay, I just got to talk, and they're like, "We need visuals." Uh, I guess I'll have to make slides or something. For any further future um, lecture.
Presentations. Yeah. Well said, though. And I think a lot of uh, the transgender community finds this like solace with Loki. A lot of the queer community finds solace with Loki. But I think if they really look further, they can find solace with a lot of other gods in the pantheon as
It
well.
states that Odin became a woman. Um,
Yeah.
and this could be, a lot of people consider that to be a physical transformation. I don't. Okay. I consider it to be the embracing of the feminine aspects within Odin's self,
Hmm.
as Odin learned esoteric practice and became the sage. The full realization of self. You can see Odin's transition from being kind of a rah rah male
Hmm.
to being the understanding and wise old guy,
Hmm.
And so it just comes across the spectrum. So, with that realization of yourself, you're going to learn more and you're going to become and show these traits that exist within yourself. And you can take that from the whole spectrum that Odin was trans. Some people say that Odin, the lover that Freya lost, is
Hmm.
Odin because Odin is actually in definitive feminine tense of the noun Od, the root noun Od. So Odin is the feminine definitive, and Odr is the masculine definitive,
Hmm.
such as in Tyr. So You
Yeah.
take that concept that Odin was embracing their femininity at the very least,
Oh yeah.
twofold transformation.
Yeah. Sigga also mentioned, of course, embracing the feminine side, practicing Sather, um, which was generally female practice to do, and he went out of his way to learn that. You know, there's a lot of that embracing of all aspects of yourself, feminine and male, both, when it comes to the practice and North heathenism.
Indeed.
Um, yeah, and one thing I didn't touch on, but I thought we should bring up was also inclusivity with disabilities. Tyr, and granted, they caused their own disabilities in a way. Tyr losing his
Yeah.
hand, Othin his own eye, but they were not treated. It's almost like they were not treated any less on the battlefield or anywhere else because of their disability. I just
Yeah.
wanted to
Well,
hit on that.
with them, yeah, they did it, but it's no different than a guy, getting drunk, driving home, and crashing into a telephone pole and becoming paralyzed, handicapped,
Right.
with physical handicap. Um, in Scandinavian society, physical handicaps, like if it was obvious when a child was born, they were a lot of times, exposed,
Mm,
because they could not survive um, in that society. Blindness, for example, was considered to be the sign of a seer to some. And then children with mental handicaps, what we would call developmental handicaps today, they
hmm
believe that those implied esoteric capacity, you know? And so once again, they would go into the esoteric community and learn the art of Seath or Fylki,
hmm
which are two types of Norse magic, the most common that exists. So they played their role in society, you know, according to their things. Like if you lost the use of your leg, well, you can still make stuff. You just can't run. You're obviously not going to go on any hunting trips,
Right.
but you can still play a part of society. So it was your usefulness to society that warranted whether you were considered to be worthless or not. It was
hmm
your merit that considered you to be that. And Odin even says about that no person is so horrible as to be considered worthless within
hmm
the Havamal. So basically, everyone has worth, um,
Yeah, that
merit
was
based.
that is one of my favorite stanzas in the Havamal, um, period. It just really resonates with me. Um, what would you say to those that are opposed to inclusion, especially in the North heathenism, that want to keep it pure?
Okay, come again. I had a little, it
Oh,
glitched on me there.
that's fine. What would you say to those opposed to inclusion in heathenism?
I would encourage them to study, read the lore, investigate archaeological evidence. So it exists both in sacred texts, it exists in history.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a genius to see where it is because it's crystal clear. All are one, all are equal. We are all fragments of each other, and our identifiers are only different facets of the same gemstone.
That's well said. Well said. So again, I'm sure people are asking, why would I bring a white cis male to talk about inclusion in heathenry? And I have my reasons personally. Um, One is I know you have a non-binary child. Uh, the second is that you have such a wealth of knowledge in that head. And I know that when you speak, you think and you study before you speak. And so I knew we would get really good information on this, things that you can hear. Plus, I have seen you in person practice inclusion, and it's really made an impact on me. as a heathen who hasn't always been welcome or received in because I'm a person of color. I'm pansexual, I'm married to a man. We have a family and a lot of eyes. I'm checking all the wrong boxes, but seeing you actually practice it in your day to day life, one of the big reasons why I chose you for this subject. So, as a white cis male, how has discrimination in the Norse pagan community affected you?
Well, I don't get ostracized because of
Mm,
it. Um,
yeah.
my biggest issue, my personal issue, is being considered a bigot by actual bigots. And because of the way I look, um, I don't fault them, but I'm thought of as possibly I'm a bigot by those who've had traumatic experiences because I look like the person who infringed upon their autonomy. Um,
Mm,
you know, and hopefully my behavior towards them helps them heal. Um, my identifiers give me privilege. We talked about white privilege before, and that's real. I'm sorry if you're a white person and you don't agree with me. Well, we'll look into shit. You're going to figure it
mm,
out pretty quick. You have half a brain. This gives me responsibility. I believe the whole saying, with great privilege comes great responsibility. So therefore, my job is to use my privileges to defend those without them. As the Havamal states in 127, and this is from my translation that I'm working on. It states, "Call infringement a crime and deny the perpetrator peace.
mm.
I will seek to use such my privilege to educate those who've been indoctrinated, because they'll let me come to them. They won't look down on me, by bigots and attempt to retrain them. I will stand in the shield wall for any who have been discriminated against, and I will advocate for them. And I will decry, as who I am, any exclusive heathen as a farce and as anathema,
Mm.
because inclusivity is one of the core values and is the will of the gods.
Well said. Seriously. Wow. So, as always, you're like this wealth of knowledge. And more than that, there's a passion, that you have when you talk about such things. And I admire that. Again, you're not a man of just words. You practice it. I've seen you practice it. Um, and I just got to say, it is honorable of you. You are an honorable man. And those are just great qualities. And it makes a big difference to people, marginalized people in the heathen community, to have someone acknowledge them, someone to say, I see you and you have a place at this table. It is such, makes such a huge impact on people. And thank you, even just personally, how you've embraced me into your community as well. um, Thank you for that. It makes a difference. And small things like that, especially to marginalized communities, can save lives, in the same aspect. So thank you very much. Um, any final thoughts about what we've discussed today?
Well, I would just say one thing, all right? To anyone listening here, just take a deep breath and think of who you are, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexuality, your social status. To the gods, you are exactly who you're meant to be. Right now, you're loved and accepted. You are valuable. As the lore states, from the well of destiny rising as sap to the branches of the world tree, to fall again as dew into the well of the lives of every living being. Your fate is woven, and you are meant to be That's who you are by divine purpose. Accept you. Because that's who you are.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much. Again, this is such a big, big subject, and I'm sure we could go on and on about it even still. But just your insight, everything you shared is one thing, but to see you practice it in real life is it brings merit to the table. So thank you for that, and I'm sure people from different ethnicities, orientations, identifications. If they watch this, I hope they find some solace and comfort and knowing that this is a practice where they belong. You know, naturally belong to it.
Indeed.
Sanford,
If you're called to it,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
if you're called to it, it's yours.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
your practice.
Mm-hmm. Sanford, it has been amazing. I knew we're going to take up some extra time on this topic and stuff, and then my little flub earlier with going live only to myself just ate up some time. So thank you for staying on longer than expected. I truly, truly appreciate you being here today. I will be sending you an invite back for more discussions, more topics to pick your brain at because there's just a lot in there that I think you need to share with the world. So thank you once again for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, brother.
Hey, anytime.
You be good.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I'll talk to you later. And this will be posted on Facebook for anyone that is interested. I am going to be converting this to a video as well. And I'll probably start a YouTube page where I can just post all of these interviews on there so people can access them later as well and when just a better location for that. So Sanford, man of many talents, many thoughts, many ideas. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.